We're almost done. Hello and welcome to what is to be the penultimate episode of the Cryptid Iceberg Deep Dive. Once again, we are going over the Cryptid Iceberg posted by Thy Cheshire Cat, and unfortunately I do have to put a little peen in this because it's not just a cryptid iceberg. To be more specific, I do adore this iceberg. Thy Cheshire Cat put a lot of work into it, and they did make the important distinction that this is the unverifiable entity and cryptozoology iceberg. Because as it turns out, in the cryptozoological community, we have a nice little bit of infighting wars in terms of what actually constitutes and qualifies as being a cryptid. A lot of the stuff on this iceberg, if you look at the strictest definition of cryptozoology and the hobby, really doesn't fit being a cryptid. Bigfoot is a cryptid, the living thylacine is a cryptid, Nessie is a cryptid because these are either animals we have yet to verify or already existing animals that are extinct that we're looking for a continued existence of. Unfortunately, then you have stuff like supernatural humans, which is like your Oswangs, your skinwalkers, which aren't cryptids. You have your unverified supernatural entities like the Mothman, the Blackbird of Chernobyl, which are again not cryptids by this definition. You have your aliens like the Hopkinsville Goblins, the Greys, the Flatwoods Monster. You've got your fearsome critters like the Squonk and the Hodag. And then you have your straight up SCPs and creepypastas like the Rake, the Slenderman, even the Ningen in a lot of cases is just based on a stupid 2chan post from 2004. But guess what? They're all still cryptids. Like it or not, cryptid is a wastebasket taxon now, and if you were to ask the average Joe Blow on the street if Mothman is a cryptid, they're probably going to say yes. Because when you get down to it, whether it's an animal or a supernatural entity or whatever people think a skinwalker is, because what most people call skinwalkers aren't actually skinwalkers, when you get down to it, they're all cryptids. We're all just mammals. They're unverified entities, and if you're going to be one of those uncomfortable knuckle draggers on r/cryptozoology who wants to be anal retentive about the definition of this fantastical hobby, then touching grass is so far beyond you, I don't know how you can get your help. Maybe just have a heart for the fantastical and just know that people are enjoying this hobby. It's fun, it's not harming anybody. I know what a true cryptid is, but I'm still going to respect my Loveland frogmen, okay? That's just how the world works. Now let's talk about a Schnellengeist. I'm also on Blue Sky. Follow me there if you haven't already. Also be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Really helps the algorithm, helps me grow. The Snallygaster, not to be confused with the Snollygoster, is a flying draconic type cryptid from Frederick County, Maryland. First spotted in the 1730s by recent German immigrants, it was named the Schnellengeist or the Quick Spirit, given its aptitude for fast flying in the nighttime skies. Described as being half bird and half reptile, possessing a beak full of razor-sharp teeth, sometimes a single monocular eye in the middle of its forehead, and a plethora of tentacles extending from its throat, the Snallygaster is a trickster or malevolent spirit entity. Also, given its rivalry with the canid Hexenwolf cryptid, it is often said that the Snallygaster is an enemy of coyotes and will frequently prey on them in the early evening twilight hours. This is yet another very weird cryptid coming to us from Maryland, and yet another example of possibly just a fearsome critter, but it's also just too fun to ignore, really. And it made for a very funny episode of Mountain Monsters, so there is that. Tullimonstrum is an absolutely bizarre soft-bodied animal coming from the fossil record in the Pennsylvania subperiod of the Carboniferous period of the Cenozoic era. Around 370 million years ago in terms of the time scale, this creature was between 3 and 14 inches long, so really small in size, but that hasn't stopped people from describing it as a modern Loch Ness monster, as in the living Tullimonstrum is often used as a scapegoat or explanation for several other cryptids, including the Loch Ness monster and including modern dragon sightings, which I want to put is very weird given that this was at first considered to be a small aquatic invertebrate animal, but is now considered to be closer to the hagfish family. It's just a bizarre looking thing. Look at this critter. It's a disc-shaped body with a weird snoot on it. I don't know if that's a jaw or if that's a pincer. Scientists can't even agree. It's just a goofy little goober, and those are my favorite types of fossils, truly. But this as Nessie, you know what? It's as likely as anything else. So this one's going to be a twofer, and I'll explain to you why. But Living Therizinosaurus skull was a rabbit hole to really go down in terms of understanding what this cryptid is supposed to be, so here are the few explanations that I have seen. Explanation number 1. First of all, understand that Therizinosaurus is a large theropod dinosaur named after the large claws on both of its hands, giving it the name of scythe lizard. The first thing that I found for this specific entry is that we simply do not know what the actual skull of Therizinosaurus looked like, specifically that what we have right now is either a placeholder or just coming from another ornithomimid dinosaur. The second option is that there is a hitherto unknown Therizinosaurus skull currently in the possession of some museum backroom that is about to change the face of paleontology as we know it, whether in terms of its age in the fossil record, or its design, or its designation, or whatever. And the third one I found is related to another cryptid on this part of the iceberg, the Kaiaimunu. Kaiaimunu is a living dinosaur from Papua New Guinea, so not Africa this time, I can't be that mad. But a lot of people seem to recognize it as being similar to Therizinosaurid dinosaurs, or rather that's simply one explanation. Others liken it to an ornithomimid, some to an oviraptoran, some to a maniraptoran, and some even still to a Sedgesaurid. And if you really have to stop and think about it, why Sedgesaurus? Who thinks about Sedgesaurus? Therizinosaurus is my favorite dinosaur of all time, so this entry absolutely enthralled me to learn more about, and Kaiaimunu, I give you a pass. If you're a living Therizinosaurid, I give you a pass.
Allosaurus had never seen such bullshit before.
The Buru is a large semi-aquatic relative of the Komodo dragon coming to us from the northern Himalayas region of northeastern India. Described as looking quite similar to its Komodo cousin, but dark blue in color with a white underbelly and 3 rows of spines all down its back, it has not been seen in quite some time. And by quite some time, I mean since the 1950s. In the last recorded sighting, it emerged from a large man-made waterway, which was then immediately filled with rocks and sediment to prevent the monster from ever emerging again. However, there's a very important thing I want to address with this. Well, okay, 2 very important things. Number 1, given the fact it hasn't been seen since the 1950s, a lot of people consider it to be a now extinct cryptid, which, cool, okay. Or, I would like to also address number 2, the more fascinating and plausible explanation, a 20-foot semi-aquatic reptile in a region of the world known for having crocodilians. Could this just be a crocodile? The Himalayan waters are a bit colder than normal for crocodiles, but, signs might point to yes on this one. Coming to us from the 3rd largest freshwater lake in all of Scotland, the Loch Awe monster may not be as fascinating or as widely known as its cousin Nessie, but I still think it adds an interesting aspect to the whole lake monster story in the region of the Scottish Highlands. Namely that the Loch Awe monster is, by most sightings and definitions, considered to be a large freshwater eel. And if nothing else, that's an incredibly plausible explanation for a cryptid, especially in Scotland. The lochs there are not known for having a large amount of biodiversity, especially when compared to other comparable bodies of water in the region, especially in Europe and especially around the saltwater regions of the British Isles. There are, however, several large populations of freshwater eel, and I would say that one could grow substantially large. The Loch Awe monster in particular is said to be around the 11 to 13 foot long range, which is really big for eels, but there are similar fish like sturgeon and catfish that also live in Scottish lochs that are said to grow to absurdly large size. But I do think the Loch Awe monster just being a large eel, incredibly plausible. And I also feel like that might just be the explanation for Nessie. You know the plesiosaur stuff is only kept around for tourists, right? Most Scottish locals consider it to be eels anyway. Does it feel like I'm being meaner than usual this episode? I decided to swap over to T for this next entry, but it's another living pterosaur, so I guess I'll have to be mean a bit more. Washorewe is a living pterosaur cryptid coming to us from South America this time. Now, not a lot is known about this cryptid. There really isn't a lot of information I could dig up. It is obscure, even among living dinosaur-type cryptids. And yes, I know pterosaurs aren't dinosaurs, don't at me on this one. But you really can't tell me you've heard of Washorewe when we have things like the Ropen and Kongamato that are infinitely more recognizable in the realm of cryptozoology. However, there is one particular thing about this cryptid that I find absolutely fascinating, and is just, I adore it. Local folklore to the region dictates that Washorewe is the mother of all vampire bats, and just from a mythological perspective, that is incredible. This is what I like to see with my cryptids. I like to see local folklore integrated into the sightings and legends. Can we please have more pteranodons leading vampire bats? Anyways, this picture is of Thalassodromius, which is a pterosaur endemic to South America. I felt that it fit the most for this particular cryptid. Mossman! No, not that one. Mossman is a 7 to 8 foot tall humanoid cryptid coming to us from Florida because, of course, it's from Florida. Also known as Paramalphate, it is described as being a humanoid entity covered in excess foliage and swamp grass, as well as Spanish moss, which gives it its name. The first recorded sighting we have is from 1978, where a couple walking along the beach spotted it at the end of a dock. Initially, they thought it was just somebody wearing a large raincoat, but eventually the figure stood up and they saw that it was covered in green moss, Spanish moss specifically, with glowing luminous red eyes before it retreated into the surrounding swampland. And Spanish moss, for anyone who lives in Florida, is quite the obvious plant to see, so a creature walking around covered in this moss would be a hell of a sight. This thing is essentially just Swamp Thing, you know? Just a real-life Swamp Thing. Explanations run wild. There are people who attributed sightings to the spirit of a native slain by Spanish conquistadors. Others say that's more just like a Bigfoot along the lines of the skunk ape. Or more still believe that it is, in fact, a humanoid plant, which convergently evolved bipedalism. It animalistic traits. Because, you know, Florida, man. Okay, with this one now, you've got to be kidding me. You just got to be taking the piss now with this one. The crocodingo comes from Oneida, Tennessee, and this is something that most locals to the area have never actually heard of, which gets really, really weird because a lot of people state that it has to do with the Bell Witch, which is quite the infamous phenomenon in Oneida, Tennessee. But first, the breakdown. It is described as a dog-like cryptid with a crocodile's face, hence the name crocodingo. The first supposed sighting came from a man named Hank Lemon in 1839. He described witnessing a bizarre green glow in the lower atmosphere similar to the aurora borealis, which then was followed by his two dogs acting quite strangely. And these were hunting dogs meant for taking down wolves and deer and bears, so they're not easily frightened. And then he saw this absolutely bizarre critter scampering along the woodline of his property. So this might just be an alien dog, or this could just be a straight up hoax, because nobody in Oneida, Tennessee has heard of this thing. No one I can tell has heard of it. I really do think this was made by either tourists to the area, or literally just someone online trying to make stuff up. Because the Bell Witch is heavily associated with this, or rather, the crocodingo is heavily associated with the Bell Witch, and Bell Witch legends are all through Tennessee. And of course, there are people who just claim it's a skinwalker, but everyone says that everything's a skinwalker now, so what are we to make of this? Hoax. This is a hoax. Back to something I find entirely more plausible, complete Lystracanthus fossils. Now, Lystracanthus is an incomplete fossil specimen from the late Carboniferous period stated to be a form of shark. The one thing that really sets it apart from other species, though, is the large feather-like dentricles that covered its whole body. Simply put, this appeared to be a furry shark. Maybe similar to the fur trout, I don't know. But no one really has a full idea of what this animal looks like. We have no complete fossil as far as we know. Enter this cryptid, which states that the full Lystracanthus fossil set has been found, and that it is in fact quite similar to the modern-day frilled shark. This is a theory that I already felt was pretty popular in the paleontological community, especially for ancient sharks, because the study of extinct fossil sharks is just fantastic. I love this study. I can see something similar to the frilled shark looking like this. That's really cool. At the bottom of Bala Gilbert Glen, on the Isle of Man, lies Grenaby, in the upper part of the Silverburn Glen. And just below there comes in the Avonreich from the Moyni Moor and a brooklet from Ballalona. And I think this is it. This is the one that does me in. Just as Jimmy Squarefoot. Jimmy Squarefoot is a 6-foot tall man pig with the tusks of a boar. His name is Jimmy. He has square feet. He's from the Isle of Man. I think Bob Dole's interested in him. He's just Man Bear Pig. You know what, Britain? This is what does me in. This is the one. This is the one that does me in. Shame on you, England. I expected this from Wales. Another one from England, this is the shug monkey. The shug monkey is said to be a cross between a black sheepdog and, well, a monkey. Described as having a vicious ill temper and being more associated with the supernatural than any actual real animal. At the first glance, most people would consider it to be a hominid-style cryptid along the lines of a skunk ape or a Bigfoot, but that's not the case. In fact, the shug monkey is closer in line to the black shuck or other such supernatural creatures. It is heavily associated with Norse mythology. It is also heavily associated with witchcraft. It also has not been seen since the onset of World War II, which has led to an absolutely bizarre theory that it was wiped out during the London bombing blitz. Oh, okay, sure. In August of 1848, the HMS Daedalus, a member of Her Royal Majesty's naval fleet, was sailing the South Atlantic to the island of St. Helena. In the mid-afternoon, Captain McQuay, as well as near the entirety of the ship's crew, witnessed what they reported to be a 60-foot-long sea serpent. Known as the Daedalus serpent now, it passed by the ship so close that Captain McQuay described it as, if it were a passerby, he believes he would have recognized it. Its head raised about 4 feet out of the water, regarding the crew in an almost lazy, sort of lopsided fashion before it descended back beneath the waves. The entire sighting took place over the course of 20 minutes, and most of the crew regarded it as being more serpentine than traditionally reptilian, leading a lot of skeptics to believe it was more a sighting of an oarfish than any sort of sea serpent. But again, this is the only only sighting of the creature that we have. Giant oarfish are nothing new to the world of cryptozoology. In fact, they are generally believed to be responsible for the majority of sea serpent sightings, but even so, this is still an anomalously large oarfish if the size is to be believed, and a 20-minute sighting from almost the entire crew of this ship stands out a lot more compared to other sea serpents of the time. Alvin's plesiosaur is an interesting story because it involves several entities we've already discussed before. First of all, this creature was spotted by the DSV Alvin submersible off the coast of the Bahamas in 1965. The sighting was held by Marvin McManus and Bill Ramey, two engineers who were participating in the dive at a depth of near 5,000 feet. And this is in one of the first ever dives of the Tongue of the Ocean, a large narrow strait separating the islands of Andros and New Providence. As with most underwater cryptid sightings, it did not last very long, but McCamus's description was recorded in the submersible's wet log, although it was notoriously stricken from the record once they had emerged. McCamus was then very leery about ever repeating his sighting, fearing that he would be ridiculed by the mass public at large. Enter Charles Berlitz, author of Without a Trace, as in the same Charles Berlitz who recorded a sighting of the deep-sea abominable snowman not far away from where this particular sighting took place. I need to get my hands on a copy of this book. I absolutely have to read it. While there's still not a lot of credible evidence to back up this sighting, Carl Schuker, a notable name in the cryptozoological community, still considers it to be a valuable sighting to the formation of deep-sea diving and cryptozoology at large. So I do think there is still something here. Maybe we just need more submersibles near the Bahamas, who knows. Lacrimocorpus dissolvens, also known as the squonk, is one of the most popular and beloved fearsome critters and cryptids to ever grace the Appalachian Mountains. A resident of Pennsylvania, sightings of squonks started to take place during the late 19th century. It is described as being a pig-like animal with ill-fitting, wrinkled skin covered in warts that supposedly it's very ashamed of. In fact, it is so ashamed of its appearance that if sighted by people, it will hover in place, start obsessively sobbing and crying to the point where its tears dissolve its whole body. The poor thing literally melts into a pile of tears and bubbles and wax, and supposedly it was captured and kept in a jar when it did this once. This wax was then turned into a candle. Also, supposedly the squonk's method of love and reproduction is binary fission, which... You know what? Absolutely. I just love the squonk, you guys. From one fearsome critter to another, here is the roperites. Rhynchoropus flagelliformis is a fearsome critter said to resemble an overly large roadrunner, where instead of a beak, it has an elongated loop or lasso at the end of its face that it uses to snare prey. Sighted throughout the American Southwest during the height of the 18th and 19th centuries, it is said to outrun any man or roadrunner and feasts on rabbits, jackalopes, lizards, and other small critters. And this is the part where I say that the fearsome critters are by and large hoaxes. They're stories told by lumberjacks and frontiersmen to sort of haze newcomers to the profession, although there are some examples of fearsome critters that I believe could be used just to explain disappearances in the woods. See also the hide behind. But the roperite is just another one of the really silly ones. Also known as the gray dhole, the Burmese dhole is an as yet unidentified species of canid coming from Myanmar. For those of you unfamiliar with canid morphology, a dhole is already a species of wild dog we're aware of. They're very populous in India and other parts of Southeast Asia. They're also quite infamously regarded as being pests, both for livestock, farmers, and general citizens. The gray dhole is an as yet unverified species of these animals that frequents the Mangdang Reserve. Most stories of this creature just involve the fact that there was at one point a species of gray dhole that has since been wiped out. However, there are still sightings purported to this day of this creature. And much like tangvoir, I really do think this is quite likely to exist considering the number of similar caniforms that exist in this part of the world. In addition to this, there are similar canid cryptids that I also believe are equally likely to exist, like an extant population of the Honshu wolf, which I find is very similar to the gray dhole in a lot of its sightings. All in all, this is an incredibly likely one, and I do want to hear more about it in the future. Living gargoyles is mostly just a catch-all term for descriptions of cryptids that happen to resemble gargoyle statues, or else sightings of creatures that could be considered living gargoyles. As such, it's a very broad-reaching definition, so a lot of different creatures or sightings could be fit under this category, but one particular sighting does stand out to me. In 1986, at Houston's Johnson Space Center, a NASA archivist by the name of Frank Shaw was walking back to his car after a late-night shift when he saw what he described as an animate gargoyle statue perched on the edge of the building. According to him, it had a large wingspan that draped off its body like some sort of a billowing cloak or cape, similar to Batman in a way. and it also leered at him with a very dangerous, enigmatically menacing face. The sighting itself was very fleeting as the creature soon took flight and soared off across the sky, and in the years following, a lot of people have described it as being a similar sort of entity to the Mothman or the Owlman of Cornwall, but at the same time, these are not the words of Frank Shaw himself. Frank Shaw just described it as seeing an animate gargoyle statue. And if that's all that the original citer has to say on the subject, I'm going to take him more at face value than any speculative people in the aftermath. And this is also very fascinating because the Men in Black showed up pretty close by to this incident in order to make sure that he did not speak about it in depth. And as you all know, if the Men in Black get involved, things are incredibly more likely to be suspicious. And to round off this tier, we're going to talk about one of the most bizarre, harrowing, and apocalyptic alien encounters in all of Canadian ufology with the Garson Invaders. The Garson Invaders are 13-foot tall, bluish-green, almost lobster or shrimp-like aliens that menace people with psychic powers and visions. The most infamous sightings of these creatures took place at 5 p.m. on July the 2nd of 1954 outside the town of Garson, Ontario. The witness specifically was a young Italian immigrant named Ennio La Sarza. Now, while he is by no means the only person to have spotted these aliens, he is one of the few that we know of to give a credible description of what the encounter entailed, and this was recorded in Project Blue Book, that infamous document of different UFO and alien phenomenon. According to Garson, he witnessed a 25-foot diameter spherical saucer land on the ground where 3 of these 13-foot tall creatures emerged. La Sarza, upon witnessing these creatures, of course attempted to run away, wouldn't you? But the leader of this trio of aliens advanced upon him and subjected La Sarza to psychic visions. According to La Sarza, he was shown absolutely apocalyptic and dreadful visions of the future, and he was then asked by them to complete a task. The task itself has not been revealed by La Sarza, and no writings that we are aware of contain the details of it, but based on what the witness has said and corroborating other witnesses, it was a task that at first seems menial, almost normal, too normal, but speculatively could lead to an absolutely underlyingly horrifying result. La Sarza was a miner. He worked in a nickel mine not far from Garson. The leading theory therefore goes that he was possibly asked to retrieve some nickel ore for these aliens so that they may create a nickel cobalt nuclear device. A device that theoretically could poison the entire atmosphere of our planet. And if that was the intent of these invaders, the good news for us is that they don't really harass people in high levels of government. The bad news for us is that they will harass people who they believe can be made useful to their own ends. These ends we still do not know, but they may spell the end of our species as far as we know it. And it is on that delightful note that we will end today's episode. Thank you all for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Comment down below and let me know what you enjoyed about this episode, cryptids you might want to hear more about in the future, anything I haven't yet talked about in this iceberg, or maybe new topics entirely. The next iceberg is locked and ready to go as soon as I finish the next episode. And on top of that, I will be doing 10 bonus cryptids in the next episode as well, cryptids that were not in this particular iceberg. I am having a blast as we get close to the end. My hair is standing on end. I'm anxious. It's amazing. Fantastic feeling to almost be done with this. I'm loving the audience that we're growing. And as always, thank you all for watching. God bless. Have a wonderful day. Oh, and Happy New Year.